I suppose to start off and say, like, we've one of the most highly qualified young people in all of EU. I think we've the highest number between the ages of 25 to 34, and that's something to be commended. But unfortunately, our system is not without its challenges. So I suppose to address a number of the issues there around the fees. Well, first of all, we have free fees in name only. It's a student contribution charge, which was introduced a number of years ago at €3,000. I know it's permanently been reduced to 2,500, but for parents who had children in third level last year and the year before, they only had to pay 2,000. For them, it is an increase of 500, and it's unfortunate that it couldn't be just left at 2,000 for another year. And I'm just wondering if it's the intention going forward to continue to reduce that until it's fully abolished, because I think that's something we need to plan for. As already been identified, student accommodation is probably one of the biggest issues facing our students at the moment. We hear all of the stories of the long commutes the students have to make because they cannot get accommodation at an affordable rate close to the college. Many of them are relying on public transport, but oftentimes it's not very reliable. Others are paying quite high costs for rent, but it results in them having to work part-time along with studying, and in fact working part-time they're often working quite long hours, which means their studies often suffer. They may end up failing exams or even dropping out because of burnout. We hear of other students sleeping in their cars or sofa surfing on their friends' sofa in their apartments, and it's just not good enough. It's not enhancing their experience as third level students. I suppose the rates they pay, especially even for student purpose-built student accommodation, could be up to €1,000 a month. And again, often charged for the 12 months, even though they don't need it for the 12 months, they may only need it for 8 or 9 months, but have to pay it because of the shortage of availability of accommodation. The shortfall, I think, is at the moment identified as about between 25 and 30,000 places, and that is predicted that it could rise to 68,000 by 2035. So that's very substantial, and I think needs to be addressed. Now, UCD is probably one college with the greatest amount of accommodation, but it's also probably the most expensive as well. And I mean, the UCD Village, which was completed in 2021, there were 3 tiers. I think they were initially called Silver, Gold and Platinum, and the rates that were being charged for each tier has increased to a spec that they didn't need to be. I think they've renamed them to tiers 1, 2 and 3, but the costs attached are still quite substantial. Now, you referenced the investment of 67 million in phase 2 of the village, and that's obviously very welcome. But a concern was raised with me that the cost seems to be very substantial, and it's approaching €250,000 per bedroom on university-owned land. Now, to me, that's extortionate. And I mean, it's going to end up with the charge being really, really high again to try and make up that cost. So I'm not sure why. I know it's a tendering process and the contractors are coming in, but I just think we need to just standardise the accommodation. It doesn't need to be to a high spec. Just make it substantial and appropriate and so forth. But something that's suitable for students, that is good quality without being, I said, too expensive. I mean, a lot of this student-specific accommodation is provided by private investors, and a lot of them are investment funds. They're getting generous tax rates, and they are built into quite an unnecessary high spec, and therefore then it costs a lot to the end user. The other issue is the disparity in the borrowing framework for technological universities. So traditional universities can borrow money often through the European Investment Bank to build on-campus residences, but technological universities cannot. And I know this has been something that's been acknowledged for years. I mean, the 2018 Technological Universities Act foresaw a borrowing mechanism, and in 2021 the government had announced a clear decision to allow it, yet there's no mechanism in place as yet. Now, I know you're aware of this, and I think you've been working with the TUs, so perhaps you could give us an update on where that's at, because I know some of the TUs are ready to go if this was put in place. They have their plans in place, they're ready to go to planning practically. Now, it'll still take a couple of years for the construction to be completed, but at least there'll be an end site and they'll be able to provide accommodation. I think only one technological university has some accommodation at the moment, the rest of them do not. In relation to north-south mobility and cooperation, it's good to see that there has been an increase, but I think it's something that we need to look at and increase more. Within the Shared Island Unit, there's the North-South Research Programme, and I'd like to see that even enhanced and its remit widened to maybe look at education at a third level on an all-island basis. I mean, there is a disparity between, the different assessment structures like the A levels compared to the Leaving Cert. They're quite different. So the entry levels for university for people from the south going north and vice versa, need to be worked out that it's fair to all of the students. So I definitely would like to see more north-south cooperation between our universities and colleges. In the Irish language, I mean, I think you mentioned there, as outlined in the 20-year strategy for the Irish language, 20% of recruits to the public sector must be competent in the Irish language by 2030. Now, that's only around the corner, and we're not near it at the moment. I think only 1% of our third level students actually receive education through the medium of Irish, and many of our students have got their education to date through Irish, so be in primary school and post-primary school, and it's extremely difficult for them to then have to try and start learning through English. So we need to increase the range and uptake of Irish medium courses at third level. But I suppose training students across academic disciplines and third level institutions to be competent to work in Irish, both to meet the educational and skill needs of our Gaeltacht communities and our Irish speakers everywhere. But also within the EU, our language is a recognised language, and then obviously the 20% public service recruitment target, which is only around the corner. We could learn a lot from the Welsh model because, I mean, I think about 20 years ago they had only about 3% of their students learning through Welsh. The figures could be slightly wrong, but I think they're around that. But now it's 20%, and they've done that in the space of, I think it's 20 years or maybe less. So I think we need to really look at something on the same level. Also, the third level students have indicated that they would like to see something done in Ireland that was done in Wales, I think, which was free language courses within the college, just to learn Irish, not necessarily to do their course through Irish, but to learn to speak Irish, because there is an uptake in the interest in the language at the moment, and we should capitalise on that. On apprenticeships, again, I know you said there was a reduction in the fee, and I'd like to see again that fee reduced till it's finally abolished as well. And I mean, many of our apprenticeships are working for very, very small money, and they're getting way less than the minimum wage. I heard about a case recently where a young lad, and he was in his early 20s because he'd done something else after he left school, and then went into an electrical apprenticeship, and he was getting €7 an hour when he started. And I mean, I think it might have increased in the second year till 8. I know when he's qualified, he probably can charge what he likes because there's such a shortage, but it's difficult to attract people in, especially older people who might have a family or other commitments, into doing apprenticeships if the wages are so low. Also, on the Further and Higher Education Committee, we're looking in depth at apprenticeships at the moment, and I know there's a traditional craft apprenticeships that we're all pretty familiar with, but there's then an uptake in the business-led consortia apprenticeships, and I know the National Apprenticeship Office are looking at a sort of an integrated model for the two, which is welcome. But there are concerns expressed that it looks like it's going down the road of the consortium model rather than the traditional craft model. And just in Britain, they went down that road and ended up having to abandon it, and they're going back to the craft model because a lot of students pulled out of that because it ended up being used as just cheap labour and students not getting the appropriate training that they needed. Thank you, Chair.